evangelism principles of Philip, and some of the evangelism stuff of Paul, which is bigger. That's bigger, obviously. I don't want to say the easiest one. That's not right. Philip will. But pick one of those, and then it's a short paper, mostly ministry focused. Okay? So just do that, April 6th. If you're in the Wisdom Lit class, if you're in the New Testament class, no, New Testament, you're due, no. New Testament, forget I said that. Your paper's due on whenever. If you're in Wisdom and Acts, pick one to do on time, and then do the other one shortly after that. Does that make sense? That applies to Silas, and a bunch of you. Right?
Yeah, about half the
Okay, you know what I mean. I said that before. Okay, everybody good? Keep up the good work. All right. Here's what we're going to do today. I want to very quickly, and I mean very quickly, finish this first missionary journey of Paul, just summarize some stuff, bring some stuff together, some lessons. And then, I'm sorry, I made an executive decision. We're going to skip Acts 15, which is the Jerusalem Council. Which is important, obviously, because it's in the Bible, and it's a big issue, and there are some important lessons, but I want to stick with the journeys and the travel and the going to Greece and the Philippi. There's so much to talk about. Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, Corinth. There's so much there, and I don't want to give that short shrift. So that's what we're going to do. And then I'm excited. Sorry. All right, everybody good? So you should have an outline. The one from last time on Acts 13 and 14, skipping 15, sorry. And then I just gave you a new one on Acts 16, didn't I? Okay, that's what we're going to do. Everybody good? All right, awesome. All right, and we start. Heavenly Father, thanks for this class. Thanks for these students. Thanks for the gospel. Thanks for our Lord Jesus and the Holy Spirit who teaches us and guides us into the truth and shapes and forms our lives and prepares us for ministry and living. But I pray that this class session and what we think about and learn and discuss will contribute to just our reflecting the character of Jesus and being better prepared to more effectively proclaim the good news of the gospel. Lord, thank you for this time of year, the season of Lent, and just pray, Lord, that you'll just continue to give us physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual strength as we navigate these days and weeks of the semester, but also this season of the Christian year. Just pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, everybody good? Here we go. We talked about the first journey, right? Paul's going to the cities in the area of Galatia. Name them. The biggest one, the justification sermon. Pisidian Antioch. Am I in trouble? Yeah, she's here.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I didn't get any. I ordered one.
I'll send you the prices.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
It's just like a little side business.
Good man. Thanks a lot. All right. The coffee's free. The cups are $5.
Exactly.
Okay. Yikes. Okay, sorry. What? Pisidian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, right? Big sermon, justification, and then he goes to these other places like Lystra, and no Torah, no Old Testament, talks about God's creator, general revelation. We did that, Whales and Stars. All right, and then there's the strength of Paul's character. He was beaten, stoned, and left for dead. Remember, in Lystra. So, I want to finish this in a hurry anyway, so here we go. So, in Lystra, remember the general relation? In Lystra. Some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium, which, by the way, is a long ways away, over 100 miles in the case of Pisidian Antioch. And they won the crowd. They stoned Paul. They dragged him out of the city, thinking he was dead. He got up, went back into Lystra. The next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe. Way to go, Paul. My goodness. The suffering, the persecution for the gospel. They preached the gospel in that city and won a large number of disciples. So there was a success. right? In Lystra. All right, the end of this journey. What does Paul do after he plants these churches in these 4 cities? Then they return, if you can imagine, to the place where he got stoned and left for dead. Then they return to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, doing what? Strengthening. I think strengthening is the main word. And then by strengthening, he did 3 things. What were those 3 things? He encouraged. Okay, encouraged. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then he, feel free to read.
I'm going to explain suffering.
Okay, warn them about suffering. And thirdly, appointed leaders and local leaders. So he goes back and visits these churches, right? So after having gone to Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, and then what does he do? He goes back and back and back and back and then back to the mother church, right? And that's kind of the trajectory. Preached the word in Perga. From there, went back to Syrian Antioch, the mother church, where they had been committed to the grace of God for the work they had now completed. On arriving there, they gathered the church together, reported all that God had done, and how he had opened a door of faith to the Gentiles. They stayed there for a long time with the disciples. So he goes back, tells everybody, gives a report. By the way, Paul had been gone for about a year. This had all taken about a year. And then returns and tells them all what he did. Right? So back. Some of the principles, the gospel divides. We talked about this already, right? Going to these churches, believers, and then those who oppose Paul. In almost every place, right? Gospel divides, just like the Navy ship coming into San Diego Harbor. Secondly, the bold proclamation to the unreached. Paul goes to Pisidian Antioch, the Jewish people, right, with the Torah, but he also goes to Lystra and Derbe, people without the Torah, Gentiles, superstitious people. Well, I guess the principle for today is to reach the unreached. Do you know about the 1040 window in missions and all that, right? This 1040, what's the 1040 window again? Anybody? I mean, I don't know if you talk about this in missions and all that. But yeah, give a shot, Silas.
It's the parallels between the 10th and 40th parallel, and it represents the largest concentration of unreached people groups.
Okay. And just some of the stats. 82% of the poorest of the world's poor live in this area. 84% of those with the lowest quality of life, life expectancy, mortality, and so on. The hub of the world's major non-Christian religions, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on. Close to 100% of those who are both most poor and have least access to Christian resources, the least Christian resource investment, and least sharing of the Christian message. So this is the hardest part, the most unreached part, the most non-Christian part, the most the other religions part, and it's a difficult place to go. And yet, that's where Paul went. I mean, not here, but he went to his 1040 window. And now I think the principle is for us. 2/3 of the world's population, more than 4.4 billion people live in the 1040 window. That's a lot. Unreached, unevangelized, 90% of the people living in the 1040 window are unevangelized. Poverty, as we said, 85%, of the world's poor is poor. Islam, Buddhism, least evangelized, all of that. And I think that's the challenge for the contemporary church, isn't it? To go to the unreached people groups in bold proclamation in places where it's hard, like my friends the DeBose, who went to Tokyo, right, and did that whole thing there. In the 1040 window, there's 5 million Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, tribal groups, 17 million Jews, right? That's a lot, actually. And that's what you find in there. And so to proclaim the gospel, to invite people to faith in Jesus is going to be a severe challenge, right? How do you do that? What's the strategy? Well, I think some lessons from Paul, telling the story of Jesus, using general revelation, talking about God as creator, telling the story of history, a trajectory toward a climax, right? All of that is helpful and consoling. So, Paul some of the indigenous principle of Paul's missionary policy. What does that mean? The indigenous principle. The indigenous principle. Planting churches, local people, raising up local leaders, having them define their own worship, becoming self-supporting, and that's what it means to be an indigenous church, right? And so, he was faithful to apostolic teaching by strengthening them, by encouraging them, exhorting, preaching, continuing to proclaim and announce, warning them about suffering. So he was faithful to the apostolic teaching. Right? We did this. We did that. We did that. He gave them pastoral oversight by identifying local leaders and appointing them over the church. And finally, he entrusted the church to God's faithfulness and left with the leaders intact, right? In the end, he committed them to the Lord. That's what it means to plant an indigenous church, to be a church planter and not a church stayer and do all that. All right, everybody okay? All right, just really quickly, just let me summarize some of the lessons, I think, So, lessons from Paul's first journey, the Gentile focus, right? The Gentile focus. Going to the synagogue, but ending up with the Gentiles. Mostly unreached peoples, obviously, pagan people, secular people, people without the Torah, without the story, and that's where he ends up sort of going. The new theological emphasis, justification by grace through faith. Right? In Pisidian Antioch, Galatia, Romans becomes the core of Christianity and Paul's thinking, and the core of the Christian gospel. Contextualizing the gospel. The method that he used in Pisidian Antioch, the method that he used in Lystra, and then just the lesson for us today, right? When you present the gospel, when you are before an audience, you have to think about who you're talking to, right? You would do something different to a junior high youth group. Some of you do something different to a junior high youth group than you would to an adult Bible study. You plan a 5-year-old's birthday party differently than a 50-year-old's birthday party. And so that's why to know your audience, you can't just go in, I am who I am, that's the gospel, whatever. You've got to know the audience and shape it and contextualize. That's the challenge, contextualizing the gospel. Of course, that's a big discussion. Without watering it down, without becoming like the culture. That is, putting it in relevant cultural terms that people can understand and relate to, and yet not losing the gospel altogether and assimilating to the culture around you. That's the challenge, right? And then planting indigenous churches, which we just talked about. Because for a long time in Christian missions, that was not the principle. Planting indigenous churches. Well, what was it? It was going to Africa and putting up a white church with a steeple. And having them sing the songs, our songs, right? And worship in our style. And missionaries would stay for 30 years. And this is kind of how the way it went. And now that's been changing, as I said, recently in the last 10 or 20 years. So, are we also starting indigenous churches? They should be, this is kind of the, self-supporting, self-governing, self-propagating. That's an indigenous church, right? Defining themselves around the gospel. But also, a self-expression of theology, worship, and lifestyle. Obviously, they're not going to just make up theology and do whatever they want, but, their expression of it, and how they understand it, and so on. Indigenous churches are not inconsistent with the continuing work of the missionary, right? Going back, helping, so on like that, but letting them be self-supporting. Attaining the goal is done at different rate in different places, right? Depending on where you are. So I'll just really quickly just tell you the story of my experience with this. This is a church in Russia, in a place called Tambov, Russia. I've been there several times. Actually took Kuiper students there to do children's ministry, and VBS type stuff in the orphanages in Russia, but I've also been to this church, and you can see it's quite a sizable church, right? This is a big church, an evangelical Christian church in Tambov, Russia, right? And sort of they have a Christian school that meets in this church. Obviously, it's a church. It was also a Bible college. And so this was a place where young people were coming from all over Russia and actually from Ukraine also to come to this place to study ministry, theology, Bible, so that they could go back to their little villages and pastor the churches. So this was a training place. Right? So I've been here several times, 2 weeks at a time, to teach in the little Bible college. These young Russians who would then go back to their villages and be pastors. Now, when I say pastor of a church, I'm talking about a church that's 12 people, 21 people. Are you with me? This is not like go back and be a pastor of a huge church. But these little villages out in rural areas, there's Christians, there's believers, but these people, they didn't have any leadership. They didn't have any training. They didn't have any way to lead. And so they would come to this place and learn that, and then go back, and we were raising up local leaders, in other words. Does that make sense? So it was good. I would go to this church and stay there for 2 weeks. How many students were there in the class? I would say 25 to 30 were in this little class. And then various people would go for 2 weeks at a time. And you would teach one course for 1 week with 25 or 30 Russians in the classroom. And then you would do the next course. And then somebody else would come for 2 weeks and do something else. Actually, we were sending a lot of professors from Kuiper College to do this. This was years ago, so you don't remember the people who went. Yeah. Dick Hertel, Steve Pettis, Jim Ritzema. Okay, these are people when I first came who were here. That's all I did that. We'd go, so the teaching was all, I did it in English, I didn't know Russian. The teaching was all through a translator. So I would teach, and I would have this young woman, her name was Katya, and she was with me all the time. And she translated as I taught in English, like I'm doing now. And at first it was awkward. Have you ever done a teaching or done anything through a translator?
Yeah.
Okay, at first it's really awkward, right? Like, Jesus is the Son of God. He came from, I mean, at first it's really like weird and awkward, and then it's after a while she said to me, "You can talk faster. It's okay. I can do this." And then by the end of the time, I was just talking normally, just like this, and she was, as I ended, she spoke. There was hardly any pause whatsoever. It was just like that. It just went. And it was just so cool to see these young people. They ate this up. They ate this up. Because they did not have Bible training. They did not have ministry training. And they wanted to serve God. They wanted to lead their little church in their village. And they wanted this training like crazy. It was interesting because in that Russian culture, there's such a respect for education and teaching and learning. That whenever, it was just so weird, whenever I walked into the classroom, the students would all stand up. And I would have to tell them to sit down. It was just a respect, and this is where that happened, and they went. So that you can see what this church looks like. You see this church, you're saying, "Oh, wow, man, what a weird-looking church." But you know what the design of that church is supposed to sort of mimic, in a way? Because what's the religion of Russia? The official religion of Russia?
Eastern Orthodox.
It's Eastern Orthodox, right? It's Russian Orthodox. So here you see the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow, Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church. That's what they look like, right? And so what this church did in Tambov was they made their church like that. They're not trying to, this is not an Orthodox, but you see what I mean? The culture, the architecture, and they're an indigenous church, and this is an evangelical, Bible-believing, all that kind of evangelistic place. But yet, this is the way they designed their church, right? And there it is. And you can see it's still partially, at the time, still partially under construction. As they got money, they completed the church. And there's the pastor of this church. He was trained somewhere else. He's a local pastor, a Russian. And he was the pastor of this church, who we went to, and he oversaw the church. His name is Reuben, Pastor Reuben. And there he is, just a cool guy. He barely spoke English, a little bit, broken English, but we would talk, and I would stay with him, and so on like that. Kind of a cool guy, just a cool guy, just, yeah.
How long ago was this?
It's over 10 years ago. 2007, 2008.
Like
So-
15 years ago.
I'm an old guy. So I was a while ago. And so but we did this, I probably went 7 times to this little church, either with Kuiper students or to teach for 2 weeks. And either one or the other. And then this is their church building. And you can see this is where their sanctuary, where they worship and people gather. Then you have a balcony up in the top. So this is a sizable church, and they're trying to do Christian ministry, and it's a local church. And we were helped to train them, and so on. There's their little 17-year celebration. And there's the church. This is where we slept. Beds are a little short. I'm just saying, a little short. That's our nice bathroom. So they did make a really nice room to host guests, like when I came. And this is one of the nicest rooms in the church. There's the bathroom. That's pretty cool. That's a nice bathroom, all of that. And the other buildings around, I know the Russian culture with communism in the 60s and 70s. All these buildings, they all look the same. They're all gray. They all look like this. They're all exactly the same because everybody's going to live the same. In the same apartment building, under the same conditions, and it's just very drab. It's just not very attractive all over. There's the not young, she's not too young, the woman who did the cooking and the food for all of us. She was a very nice woman. There's the kitchen before we ate. There's the place settings and so on. And then you can see everything the same around the church. These are Kuiper students. You know, Russian. These are local. These two women are Russians. Russian. Ross Draveling? No.
Is Jeremy in that photo?
Jeremy, where's Jeremy Visser?
Oh, in the back.
Jeremy Visser.
Yeah, he is.
Where are you?
He's
There
the
you
same
are.
race, yeah.
And Jeremy
Oh my
Visser.
goodness. Take a picture of that.
That guy's my 15-year-old son. He's now over 30. So that tells you how long ago this was. And here we are, Kuiper students, Big John. Where's Jeremy? There he is.
Yep.
There he is. And then some of the women, these are Russians. And so it was just so cool to be there, to do this together, to observe an indigenous church and a local group of people doing it their way. You know what I mean? This is the way it was meant to be. And there I am preaching at the church. This is Pastor Reuben's wife. Her name is Luba. And she spoke English perfectly. And so she was my translator at the Sunday service while I was preaching. As you can see, this is going to be communion set up, and that's the way we're going to do it. There's Jeremy Visser. And that woman right there, that's the Katya I spoke. She was my translator for the teaching. That's Katya. And there's Jeremy Visser doing his testimony at the church. Yeah, some of you know Jeremy. Not all of you, but some of you do. There's Katya with another Kuiper student. And there she is with another Kuiper student. And there's the Kuiper choir. Kuiper students singing at that church. Here we are singing and singing. And there's the congregation. And just a cool thing. So I just wanted to give you an example of an indigenous church training, raising up leaders, letting them define their worship and style and lifestyle, which, by the way, how many times a week? So when I went for 2 weeks to teach, one class 1 week, one class the next week, the teaching went for 6 hours a day. 3 hours in the morning, lunch, 3 hours in the afternoon, 5 days a week. And then we do all again the second week, 6 hours a day. They had worship services on Monday night, Wednesday night, Friday night, and 2 on Sunday. And so when I got there to teach my 2 classes for the 2 weeks for 6 hours a day, the pastor said, oh, and it's our tradition that the guests will be the speakers at the worship services as well. Which I hadn't quite been prepared for, but then, oh, I'm preaching Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and twice on Sunday, and then teaching my 6 hours worth of classes during the week. So I said, okay. And then one day, it was a Wednesday, it was March 8th. March 8th, everybody in the world, March 8th, it's a worldwide holiday. March 8th? What? Yeah, it's International Women's Day. So I'm sitting at supper with the pastor, Reuben. The church service is about to start, and we're sitting at supper just before the service. And he says to me, you know it is International Women's Day. I said, oh yeah, that's really interesting. That's good. We have Mother's Day, in May in our country. He says, oh, well, it's International Women's Day. He said, you will preach about women, right? I said, oh, sure I will. See, this is when you just pray like crazy, and you just speak out of your life, and you just come and do the best you can. You know what I mean? But it was just a cool experience to be in that local church. And by the way, how long did the worship service last? On Sunday, not the ones on the weeknights. On Sunday morning. How long did it last?
2 hours long.
2.5 to 3 hours. There were normally 2 sermons. Communion, a prayer time that went for 45 minutes.
Like congregational?
Yeah.
With, like people
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, and the pastor would say, okay, we're going to pray now. And then I would go up with him. He said to me, you're going to pray. I said, okay. I thought I was going to pray like a 2-minute prayer. Oh no. Any prayer concerns? Yes. Come forward. An old woman comes forward, and then she voices her concern in front of the congregations. The pastor says, okay, pray for her. And so I prayed for her. Any more? This went on for 45 minutes. And they kept coming up and saying and praying. And this went on. And then we had communion. And then we had another sermon. And then there was more singing. And then after the church service, there was lunch in the church basement where everybody came and had lunch together. And this was so the whole thing on Sunday lasted, for like 5 hours. And then I went back to my room and said, oh yeah, the evening service starts in an hour. This is what they did. It's just kind of a cool thing to be part of an individual church. Thanks for indulging on all of that. You find out that people, right, they worship differently, and they do different songs, they do different music, they have drums, they do stuff. By the way, the Russians are a musical people. Did you know? They are a musical people. And they had a choir. It was like professional. This little church, well, the building itself isn't little, but the town is little. And they sang, and it was just like a professional choir. They just value music and education and learning and all that. It just was a cool thing to be part of. Okay. Everybody okay? I don't know, any questions or comments? I don't know. Okay, show Jeremy this already.
I did.
Did you already send it to him? Did you say something
I
already?
said, your cruising slideshow, do you feel old yet? And he just said, what, with an exclamation point.
Say hi. All right. Are we ready? All right, let's go to the next thing, Acts 16. Let's skip ahead to Acts 16 and the new outline. Here we go. So I'm calling this, biblical Greece. Because where is Paul going to go now on this second missionary journey? Well, he's going to go what wasn't called Greece then. It was called Macedonia.